Hello students, welcome to this English class. Let us now resume today the text The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. You know that Khushwant Singh is thoroughly an Indian, although he writes in both Indian languages as also in English. We find in his writings there is an Indian setting, and Khushwant Singh in his writing here gives us an Indian picture. He tells us about the Indian characters, Indian people, Indian children, Indian way of life and all that. And a lot of things have been juxtaposed here in this text. Khushwant Singh makes a limpid delineation of the Indian system of cultural heritage and how there is interference of the Western culture in the Indian culture. Indian culture is most of the times polluted, and this has got a very clear picture in his writings. Dear students, the portrait of a lady tells us the type of people we have in India, and he brings to us three important characters of different strata of society. And you see, the younger generation, the elderly generation and the old generation. Three generations are juxtaposed here. The grandmother belongs to the old generation and the parents belong to the elderly generation, and the narrator of the text belongs to the younger generation. So, we have three generations here, and how we find there is a kind of decrease in the status of human character, human way of life, and how the old woman is virtue personified, piety personified, and she is the symbol of piety, she is the symbol of religiosity, she is the symbol of religious, philosophical and cultural heritage of India. And slowly there is a kind of a decrease, there is a kind of a decline in the way of life of Indian characters. And we know that the parents have changed their way of life to a certain extent. The old people lived in the villages, the old people lived in the the country, but the next generation, the people, particularly the people, the parents who belong to the second generation, they prefer to live in the cities, and when they went to the cities, the children have to go to the cities, and they have to go to English schools, and all these things have been reflected here in this text. And Khushwant Singh keeps these things together to make a comparison among all these three kinds of people. And if we recapitulate the ideas contained in the text before going to the final unit of the text, let us now see that in unit of the one of the text, the writer becomes very much humorous. He becomes humorous and he says that my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. The text starts with this line, my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old man, and the line gives a kind of humor, the line gives a kind of joy. And when he talks about his grandmother, he says my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. It is natural that grandmothers are old, and see now Khushwant Singh gives the picture in a different note, in a different tone also. And he also says that people said that she had once been young and pretty, she had once been young and pretty, but he defies, no, grandmother was not pretty, grandmother was beautiful, because he had seen the beauty in his grandmother. She is beautiful within and beautiful without. On the on the appearance she was beautiful, in character she was also beautiful. So, she was beautiful in her character, she was beautiful in appearance. So, she was beautiful in all ways, and grandmother is an old woman who belongs to the elderly generation, and he also talks about the dress, the kind of dress she puts on. She puts on the kind of dress that is elderly people in India used. She used thoroughly white dress, and she did not prefer the kind of dress that girls prefer to wear these days, because she belongs to the older values. She has values, she has virtues, and she never allows any room for obscenity, and she always tries to clothe herself completely. She covers her whole body, but the kind of dress these days the children wear is a kind of different kind of dress. Therefore, she does not approve of the kind of dress that children wear these days. And Sukhwant Singh tells us about her dress. She looks like a winter landscape in the mountains. In the in the mountains, particularly in the winter season, we find in the Himalayas, there is the Himalayas look thoroughly white because of the snowfall, and grandmother looks thoroughly white because she has a white appearance. Her dress was white, her silver lock means hair was also white. So, she was white and white and white, thoroughly white. So, dear students, if we again come to the unit 2 of the text, we do come to know that the village school is different from the city school. The village school is different from the city school. How is the village school different? In India, in the city, in the countries, or particularly the rural areas or in the villages, we find children go to school in the first, and when the children went to school in the first into the village schools, they did not carry any big bag as we find the children of today carry to the school, because the children today drag themselves helplessly with a heavy burden of bag. But in those days children has to carry a satchel, children have to carry a small bundle of writing and reading materials, that is enough. But and he also juxtaposes these things, and he also tells you about the village school, and the village school is attached to the temples. And what happens in a temple? You know that gods and goddesses are worshipped in the temples, and there is a kind of religious atmosphere in the temples, and the temples are the citadels of religious things, of virtues, of values, and all these things. And when the children went to school and they studied there, it was a kind of atmosphere, religious atmosphere was reflected in the character of the children. And the village school was attached to the temple, and the priests were teaching very basics of language, basics of arithmetic or mathematics. But that is the thing that is described in the unit 2 of the text, and making him ready for school was a very important affair for the old lady, for the grandmother. But the grandmother took a lot of pains to make the boy ready to go to school. It is because it is children do not wake up early, and they have to be woken up by the elderly members of the family, and that was the responsibility shouldered on the grandmother. And making him ready for school was also an important thing for the grandmother when the boy was there with her. And school was not so away from the home. It was in a walkable distance. And when the grandmother went to school with the boy, the boy studied in the veranda, and the village priest taught certain things to vernaculars, particularly vernaculars and certain basics of mathematics to the children. In the meantime, the grandmother used to sit in the temple studying the scriptures. And you see how the elderly people are very much religious, and that was a very important facet, and that is a part of Indian culture and a tradition. And she also carried some chapatis with her, to distribute these things among the village dogs. The dogs also went with them, and they were waiting for the grandmother. And when the grandmother and the grandchild would return from the school, while returning, the village dogs surrounded them, and the grandmother threw some pieces of chapatis to the village dogs, and the village dogs quarreled amongst themselves and ate them up. That was the thing that we find, and this is a part of Indian culture, and Indian people never thought of themselves. They also thought of animals and birds, and this is the kind of thing that we find in the character of the grandmother. And the grandmother belongs to an old generation, and therefore she has some values and virtues. This is the thing that we find in the unit 2 of the text. And in the next unit, unit 3 of the text, we find the parents are now comfortably settled in the city. And as father and mother had gone to the city and they have settled there, the grandmother and the child went there to stay with them. Now they went to the city to live there, and here also Khushwant Singh gives us a free picture, the city life and the country life. There is the comparison, a contrast between the city life and a country life, and parents settled themselves comfortably in the city, and the city life is a different kind of life in which we find the family relationship keeps changing. In a village, the life was something different, the relationship was something different. When the grandmother dressed the boy up before going to school, when they were in the village, you see that grandmother sang some song, particularly the prayer that dealt with God and goddesses, with a motive that the grandmother wanted to inculcate the prayer in the mind of the boy. And this is the thing that we find in the city school and the country school. These two kinds of education, the educational systems are also juxtaposed here. Dear students, in the village, the grandmother went to the school with the boy. She accompanied the boy to the school, and the school was attached to the temple, and the grandmother went to the temple and studied the scriptures. And this is the thing that we find in this unit 2 of the text. And in the city, what happens? Dear students, grandmother couldn't accompany the boy to the school. What is the reason? The reason is that in a city, the schools are far away from home. The schools are far away from residents, and therefore the children have to go by bus, and school buses run in cities. This does not happen in the villages, but it happens in the cities. The grandmother could not accompany the boy to the school. The boy had to go to the school alone in the bus, and he had to study Western science, he had to study English words, he had to study these things about mathematics, Western science. He has to study a lot of things that were not being taught in the village schools. And when a grandmother would ask the boy what he learnt at school, the boy would say these things, but the grandmother did not know these things at all. She could not help her in his studies. This is the thing that we find here. And village school, another thing that we find, music lesson was also given to the schools, to the students in the school, in the English medium schools, and when he was giving music lessons in the schools, that was a bad thing. She could not approve of it, and because she thought that music had a lewd association with beggars and harlots. So, this is what we find here in the unit 3 of the text. Yes, students, let us now resume the text again, the portrait of a lady by Kushan Singh, the unit 4 of the text. This is the final unit of the text, in which Kushan Singh tells you about the last scene of the grandmother. The grandmother is values and virtues personified. She is thoroughly Indian. She breathes Indian culture and tradition. She is a pious lady. She is a religious minded lady. She always wanted that the children should learn virtuous and religious things from the elderly people. And we know there is always a contact between the grandmother and the grandson. We do not find anything about the grandparents, I mean about the parents. The parents are thrown into oblivion. Particularly the grandmother belongs to the older generation, and the grandchild, the grandson belongs to the younger generation. And in between the parents, I mean Kushan Singh never attaches any importance to the middle culture. He attaches importance on the third generation, that is the younger generation, the generation to which the grandson belongs. And Kushan Singh is very much particular. Kushan Singh is very much meticulous about these things. And here let us see what he says in the unit 4 of the text about the grandmother. The grandmother on a very happy ending. And the text has a happy ending, and the grandmother also has a very happy ending. And the grandmother and the grandson both are separated from each other for 5 years, because the grandson went abroad. After his university studies, he went abroad for 5 years. When grandmother came to know that her grandson was going abroad for 5 years, and this was the last sign of physical contact between the grandson and the grandmother. The grandmother becomes very upset. The grandmother becomes very unhappy, because this is the last sign of physical contact that is going to be lost, and the physical contact is getting diluted. The physical contact is getting thinner and thinner. It is because when the grandmother and the grandson were in the village, there was a very strong relationship, and now they have come to the city, and the relationship slowly deteriorated. The relationship slowly became thinner and thinner, and now the grandson is going away for 5 years, and last sign of physical contact is going to be lost between the grandmother and the grandson. However, she had to reconcile with her lot. She had to reconcile with the situation. She had to adjust with the situation. This is the thing that Kushan Singh tries to maintain, and he also gives a message here that the elderly people who have Indian and culture and Indian virtues and values, they have to accommodate with the situation. When there is a change in the system, sometimes it happens that the elderly people do not cooperate do not cope with the situation, they are not able to adjust, then they are not able to adjust with the situation, they are not able to adjust with the change. But here we find grandmother is very much meticulous in this context, and she tries to adjust with all kinds of situations. Although she was upset, although she was unhappy, we find she adjusts herself to the situation. And she became when the grandson went abroad, and while going to the station, the grandmother also came to see him off at the station, and she came to see her off at the station, and but she did not talk, she did not show any emotion, she does not become emotional, because now emotion is getting thinner, because emotion does not work. Human relationship becomes mechanical in the cities. Human relationship is not, has no emotion, it becomes thinner and thinner, it becomes diluted, and therefore grandmother tries to hide her emotion. She knows she is unhappy, but she does not show her unhappiness. She tries to show, and she tries to adjust to the situation, the kind of problem, the kind of things that she is going to face in her life. And she came to see the boy off at the station, and she did not talk to him, and she did not show any emotion either. And grandmother is very much meticulous here in this text, and her fingers busy tailing the beads. Grandmother came to the station to see her grandson off, but she did not stop singing the prayer, she did not stop saying the prayer, she continued saying the prayer, she also continued counting the beads of the rosary, and finally she kissed his forehead silently. The grandmother kissed the boy's forehead silently, and that was the final, that the last sign of physical contact between the grandmother and the grandson. And the grandmother, dear students, the kind of thing that we have, grandparents particularly should learn these things from the grandmother. The mothers today in our society should learn these things from this grandmother. The grandsons today in our society should also learn these things from the grandson. And Kushan Singh juxtaposes these two characters, the grandmother and the grandson, and how they give a message to the society to learn things. So, now the grandson has finished his studies abroad. After 5 years, he comes back, and when he comes back after 5 years, he never finds any change in the grandmother. The grandmother looks as usual. Grandmothers always look old. She continue old for many years, and they look the same for many years. And when he came back home from abroad, he finds the grandmother in the same way, and she did not look a day older, and she clasped the grandson in her arms, because it is after 5 years the grandmother is going to have the young grandson with her, and this is the happiest moment in her life. And during these 5 years, dear students, she spent her times with the sparrows. She fed the sparrows. When she was in the village, she fed the village dogs. She gave some chapatis to the village dogs, but when she came to the city and she stayed there, she did not find any dogs here. And when the boy went abroad, she now gave some chapatis, crumbs of chapatis, small pieces of chapatis to the sparrows. And this is how the grandmother used to spend her times. And the students, the happiest moments continue, and the students, the grandmother, is a valuable position. Elderly people are valuable possessions in society. Younger generations should preserve these people. Elderly generations should take care of the elderly people. Elderly people are very valuable. The new is silver, the old is gold. Make new friends, do not forget the old. The new is silver, the old is gold. Dear students, let us now continue Khushwant Singh's The Portrait of a Lady. This is the text in which the grandmother happens to be the protagonist. This is the text in which the grandmother is the central character. The grandmother is a linchpin of this text, and the grandmother here happens to be the most important idea. She happens to be the most important ideology. She happens to be the most important personality, whose influence, whose character has a deep impact on the younger generation of the society. And this unit 4 of the text of the Portrait of a Lady, the grandmother gives a different kind of approach. That is, Khushwant Singh tells us, he gives us the picture of the last scene of the grandmother. In the previous 3 units, we know about the way of life of grandmother, and here how he marks the way of death. The grandmother's life comes to a standstill. Grandmother dies. The last scene is very much important. It is because in the previous scenes, that the text started with a humor, and the text ends in sorrow. Khushwant Singh starts the text with a humor. Like any other grandmother, the grandmother is an old woman. Like everybody's grandmother, his grandmother was an old woman. He starts the text with a humor, but he ends the text with a sorrow, because the grandmother her life comes to an end. In this unit, we come to know that Khushwant Singh tells us that in the evening, a change came over her. She was in her harness. She had been doing everything actively in the previous units, and in this last unit we come to know that some change came over grandmother all of a sudden. What is that? Now the grandson has come back after 5 years from the foreign land, as if she was waiting for the grandson. She has to see everybody here in the family. She was waiting for the grandson. Her son himself was there. Her daughter-in-law was also there, and now one member in the family was not there, that is the grandson. She loved the grandson the most. She wanted that the grandson should come back, should return from the foreign land. Therefore, she was waiting, as if she was waiting for his arrival. Now the grandson has come back. The grandson has returned home. In the evening, there was a great change that came over her, and in the evening that day she did not pray. That she was always praying. She was always saying the prayer. She was always counting the beads of the rosary. She was always chanting the name of God every moment. She was very pious, pious to the core, thoroughly pious, very much religious. But now there is a sea change. The evening has come. It is not only the evening, it is the evening of her life. Evening stands for death, morning stands for life. And the text started in the morning. In the first 3 units, the first unit talks of the morning, the second talks of the midday, the third talks of the afternoon of life. Now, it is the evening of life. The evening of life means she was going to die, and the writer here tells us that a great change came over her. She did not pray. What did she do? She collected the the women in the neighborhood. Grandmother collected the women in the neighborhood because she was going to establish her relationship with others also. She maintained a kind of relationship with the family members. She also maintained her relationship with others in the neighborhood. She had a good relationship with the neighbors as well. She collected the elderly women of the neighborhood. She wanted to spend some time with them. She spent the whole life with the family members. Now she wants to spend some time with the women in the neighborhood. She got an old drum and started to sing, and started beating the drum, singing, and this is what she does here. Now, the grandmother, there is a change in the grandmother's way of life. She collected the women of the neighborhood and got an old drum, started to sing, started beating the drum and started singing. What did the family members do? The family members persuaded her to stop overtraining, because she was a lady, she was an old lady, old woman, and she was tired, she was very weak, and if she would go on beating the drum and singing simultaneously, she might be exhausted, she might suffer exhaustion, and therefore, he persuaded the family members persuaded her to stop overtraining, not to continue beating the drum relentlessly, stoplessly, and it will cause overtraining. The family members stopped her, but dear students, she did not listen to all these things, and grandmother in the next morning, she was taken ill, just a mild fever, and doctor said it would go. Doctor said that the fever would go, the fever would subside, no problem, just it is a mild fever, she should take medicine, and a simple medicine will cure her from the sickness, from the fever, because it was just a mild one. But God has different things to do. God's way of life is something different. Destiny is something different. What is slotted that cannot be bloated? What is there in your fate must bear the fruits. And the grandmother has become old, she has mild fever, and the doctor said it would go, but what happened? Grandmother said, do not worry children, my end is near, my end is near, that is end means end of life. Death, death is close by, death is now knocking at the door, death is now showing his head, death has come, death is inevitable. Once born means one has to die, one must die. Jatasya hi dhruva mrityu. Once you are born means you must die. Death is the only sure thing in life. Death is the only certain thing in life. Other things are just illusions. Man has come empty handed. Man came without anything. Man came naked. Man came to the world bare hands. When he goes back after death, he goes the same way. We know there are two points in human life. One is birth, the other is death. In geometry, we know the line that connects two points. When two points are connected, it becomes a line. When two points are connected, it becomes a line. And when birth is a point, death is a point. When birth and death are connected, it becomes a line, and this line is life. And life is between these 2 points. Life is between birth and death. The line that connects the 2 points is called life. And once someone is born, has to die. Death is inevitable. Death is sure to happen. Death must come one day. But love never dies. Love is immortal. Love never changes. Love is like the pole star. As Shakespeare says, let me not to the marriage of true minds that admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. It is an ever fixed mark, like a pole star to every wandering bark. Love's not at times full, though rosy lips and cheeks under bending sickle compass come. So love is immortal. Love is perennial. Love is perpetual. Everything is subject to death and decadence except love. Love persists, love continues. Things get perished, everything gets perished except love. And here we find that grandmother is love personified. She loves the children, she loves the her grandchild also. She loves her son, her daughter-in-law. She loves her grandson. She understands only one thing, that is love. Love for mankind, not only human beings. She also loves animals. She also loves birds. And when she accompanied her grandson to the village school, she fed the village dogs. When she came to the city, she fed the sparrows, and she loved everybody. Not only that, she also loved the loved her neighbors, the people around her, because the fellow men are also important for everybody. And she loved the grandchild and grandchildren and children and granddaughter also. And this is very important what we see here in this text. Dear students, let us now again think of the text, The Portrait of a Lady by Kushan Singh. You know that Kushan Singh is an Indian writer who attaches importance to the Indian values, Indian culture and Indian tradition. You know, culture is very important in life. Life without culture is meaningless. Life without culture is like the proverbial play of Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. Culture adds spice to life, and without culture human life becomes nasty, brutish, solitary, short, poor, morose, ill tempered, drab, colorless, and life becomes rich when we have culture. Culture is engraved in our heart, engraved in our mind, engraved in our brain. You know, dear students, we have rich culture in our life. What do you think of the Ramayana? What do you think of the Mahabharata? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are very important, the two great epics of the world. They are unparalleled works. They are works par excellence. They are full of culture and tradition, cultural heritage. The Ramayana speaks of Lord Rama, Goddess Sita, and the kind of relationship that existed among the brothers. We have social life, we have religious life, we have cultural life, and we also have a political life. Lord Ram gives importance to all these things. He maintains, and this is the Ramayana is also a part of Indian culture, and Indian culture is based on the Ramayana, and everybody gives example of the characters from the Ramayana. If you go to the Mahabharata, it gives us ideas about the cultural tradition, the culture, the Indian culture, the Indian tradition, the kind of love, the kind of relationship one should have. If you have good relationship, God is with you. If you don't, you have bad mind, God is not with you. Lord Krishna was with the Pandavas. It is because the Pandavas were good. Lord Krishna did not go to the Kauravas, because the Kauravas, they did not attach importance to the Indian culture, they did not attach importance to the good things of life, they always attached importance to the villainous aspects of life, to the bad things of life. And therefore, in Indian culture we find that there is a poetic justice. Poetic justice means where virtue is rewarded and vice goes punished. Do not you find these things in the texts, in the epics? Virtue is rewarded and vice goes punished. Does Ravana become victorious? He is evil personified, he plays villainy. Does he become a winner? Does he become the winner? No. Dear students, he does not become the winner. Who becomes the winner? Lord Rama becomes the winner, because he attaches importance to the values of life, the culture of life. So, culture is a mixture of the heart and head. Culture does not mean the culture of a head only, culture does not mean the culture of a heart only. We have two vital organs. Dear students, we have two vital organs, one is heart, the other is head. the head should understand the heart, shouldn't it? Yes, it should. The head should understand the heart, and the heart should understand the head. When there is a collaboration between the head and heart, man is successful. Man becomes successful when there is a balance between the head and heart. So, that is culture. So, when culture is with us, we should have the free play of the heart as well as the head. Head and heart are equally important, and if you have the culture of head only, you cannot be successful. For example, you go on reading science and science and science and science, that is the culture of head, only science, and if you do not attach importance to the other aspects of life like love, friendship, relationship, good wishes, what are these things? These things are also important in life, and these things are related to the heart. We should have both the things, culture of head and culture of heart, and when both the things will be together, you will be successful in life. And if you have the culture of head, you only go on reading science and science and science without the culture of any emotion, without the culture of any heart, without any culture of love, friendship and all these things, will you be successful? Will you be a good man in life? No. So, heart and head are equally important, which should be given equal importance in life. And here we find this is reflected in the grandmother's life. Grandmother is an epitome of the cultural tradition of India. She is the epitome of the culture of head and the culture of heart. And in the morning, you knew that a change came over her. She became sick. The doctor said that it would go, but what happened actually in the true sense of the term? She continued, she collected the other women of the neighborhood, started beating the drum, singing, and she did not want that others should feel disturbed. And when morning came, she started the prayer again, and the rosary fell off her hands. This is what we find here, dear students. The grandmother is old, she belongs to the elderly generation, and she is virtue personified, she is values, Indian values personified. We should all attach importance to the elderly people, and the elderly people are the precious possessions of our life, and our life becomes rich, our life becomes great when we go parallel, when we accept the elderly people with us. Elderly people are very important possessions, and the important possessions of life should be taken care of, and the important ideologies of life should be taken care of. You may grow, but as Oliver Goldsmith says, that you may grow rich, you may grow materialistic well off, and he says, let knowledge grow from more to more, but more of reverence in us dwell. We may have knowledge, we may collect knowledge, like ancient women collecting fuel from vacant lots. We may collect information, we may collect knowledge, information, but wisdom is always at the top. What is wisdom? Wisdom is a balance between knowledge and information, and if we do not have wisdom, our life is lost. Life without religion, life without the cultural heritage, all these things are very important in life, Dear students, life is precious, life is full of pleasure, life is full of optimism, life is full of joys, life is full of all these things, and the elderly people are the examples of all these things. We should take care of the elderly people in our society, and the social life, the religious life, the political life, all the lives of a human being will become great when man will take care of the elderly people, because elderly people think of the younger generation always. Thank you very much.